In the very first page of the Bible, something strange happens. Genesis 1:1 tells us, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." But then, in Genesis 1:2, we read that the earth was formless and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. That shift, sudden, abrupt, almost unexplained, has puzzled readers for centuries. How can something God created be formless and void right after He made it? Did something happen between these two verses that we were never told about? Before we begin, I have a quick request. If these mysteries stir something in you, if you feel there's more to Genesis than we've been told, then show your support. Like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe to the channel, and share this message with someone who needs to see it. Your engagement helps us reach more people hungry for truth. Now let's uncover what was hidden between the very first verses of the Bible. Many scholars and ancient teachers have noticed that this gap may not just be a literary style. It might be a doorway to a hidden chapter of history, a moment in time where something profound took place. It's as if a massive event occurred between verse 1 and verse 2, but was never recorded or was intentionally removed. Some even call it the lost chapter of Genesis. If that's true, then what was erased from our scriptures, and why would it be hidden? To uncover this, we need to go back to the original language of Genesis. In Hebrew, the phrase formless and void is tohu vabohu. These words don't just mean empty, they often describe something in ruins, something that was destroyed. They appear in other parts of the Bible to describe chaos, desolation, or even divine judgment. That alone suggests that the world in verse 2 might not be the original creation, but rather the aftermath of something catastrophic. Could there have been a world before ours? This brings us to a theory known as the gap theory. It suggests there was a long period of time, maybe millions of years, between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. During that time, a whole world may have existed, a world that was later judged and destroyed before the 6 days of creation even began. It's not just speculation. This idea was supported by early Christian thinkers, ancient rabbis, and even 19th century theologians. If this theory is true, then Adam and Eve were not the first beings to walk the earth. If a world truly existed before the one we know, what happened to it? And more importantly, who lived there? Some believe this was the time when angelic beings, including Lucifer, were given dominion. Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 seem to hint at powerful celestial figures who ruled over realms, walked among stones of fire, and then fell from grace. These descriptions don't match any earthly kingdom after Adam. Could they be echoes of a forgotten age, an era that ended in ruin and was buried between two verses? The fall of Lucifer, as described in various scriptures, may not have happened during Adam's lifetime, but long before him. According to this view, Lucifer led a rebellion in this ancient world, causing destruction that forced God to render judgment. The chaos, the darkness, and the void of Genesis 1:2 would then be the results of that war, a celestial judgment that turned a once beautiful creation into a wasteland. This changes everything. The first verse of the Bible would be about creation, and the second, about destruction. This also explains why, when God begins the 6-day creation process, He doesn't create the heavens and the earth from nothing. They're already there, but in ruins. God simply says, "Let there be light." He doesn't say, "Let there be land," or "Let there be a world," because the framework already exists. It just needs to be restored. Could it be that Genesis 1 is not about the original creation, but about the rebuilding of a world that once fell under judgment? This theory is not just found in Christian theology. Many ancient Jewish texts also mention worlds that existed before this one. The Talmud refers to worlds that God created and destroyed before ours. Early mystics believed there were entire eras, cosmic ages, that came and went, each ending with judgment before God created what we now know. These ideas were not labeled heresy back then. They were considered deep, hidden wisdom, knowledge too vast for the common reader. Maybe that's why the true beginning was sealed between the lines of Genesis. If there truly was a hidden chapter between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, then it wasn't just a historical footnote. It was the beginning of the first cosmic conflict. The Bible often speaks of spiritual warfare, but where did it begin? If the rebellion of Lucifer took place before Adam, then the earth we now live on could be the aftermath of that ancient war. The darkness mentioned in Genesis 1:2 may not just be physical. It may symbolize the spiritual darkness that had covered the world after a massive fall in the heavens. Some ancient Christian thinkers believed that this hidden chapter was intentionally veiled by God, not to deceive, but to protect. Humanity, still in its infancy, might not have been ready to understand what came before. The story of Adam and Eve was the beginning for us, but not the beginning of all creation. There may have been rulers, civilizations, and even temples before Eden, and all of it was wiped clean when God declared judgment. Genesis 1:3 would then be the first spark of mercy after a forgotten fall. This would also explain why the serpent was already in Eden, cunning and ready to deceive. He didn't just appear out of nowhere. He had a history, a past that predates Adam. If this serpent is truly a symbol of Satan, then how did he already fall before man was created? The answer may lie in that missing chapter, a chapter where the first betrayal happened in the spiritual realm, and the punishment was a ruined world waiting to be reshaped by the voice of God. That, a voice, "Let there be light," was more than creation. It was a divine reset. The book of Jeremiah gives us one of the clearest clues. In chapter 4, the prophet sees a vision of the earth that is formless and void, using the exact same Hebrew words as Genesis 1:2. But in Jeremiah's context, it clearly means destruction, cities collapsing, light gone, the land in desolation. This suggests that the phrase tohu vabohu wasn't just poetic language. It may have been a coded way to describe judgment, one that links Genesis to an earlier fall that most people never noticed. If the formless and void earth in Genesis is indeed a result of judgment, then we're looking at a Bible that starts not with creation, but with restoration. That changes everything we thought we knew. It means the 6 days of creation weren't about making something from nothing, but about healing what had been broken. And God, in His mercy, chose to begin again, not by erasing all traces of the past, but by covering them with light, order, and life. But the scars, they're still there, hidden in the structure of Genesis. And perhaps that's why so many cultures around the world have legends of great floods, destroyed civilizations, and golden ages that ended in disaster. Could those stories be distorted memories of the world that came before ours? The Bible doesn't deny that something came before. It simply starts a new chapter. But between those two verses, 1:1 and 1:2, there may be echoes of a forgotten war, ancient thrones, and beings who once walked the earth before man ever breathed. Some researchers have even pointed out that the phrase, "in the beginning," Bereshit in Hebrew, could suggest a beginning within a larger framework, not the absolute start of everything. It's like opening a book and realizing the first page is actually chapter 2. What if Genesis was written as a continuation, not of God's story, but of creation's story? A new beginning after something had already ended. A divine act of redemption disguised as the first chapter of the Bible. So the real question becomes, why wasn't this hidden chapter included? Why didn't God clearly tell us what happened before Genesis 1:2? Maybe He did, just not in the way we expect. Maybe the truth was scattered in pieces across prophets, psalms, and apocalyptic visions, and only those who search deeply across scripture and time begin to see the picture. A picture of a God who doesn't just create, but who rebuilds, who restores what was lost, and whose greatest mysteries are found not in what is said, but in what is left unsaid. There's something powerful about the idea that God starts the Bible with silence. Between two verses, an entire era may have come and gone, and yet the scriptures move forward with purpose, as if inviting us to search deeper. What was the world like before light was spoken? What kind of life or judgment left the earth in ruins? These aren't just questions for scholars, they're questions that shape how we understand God, His justice, and His mercy. In Job 38, God asked Job, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" But then he speaks of sons of God, shouting for joy, and morning stars singing together. These aren't humans, they existed before mankind, and if they witnessed creation, they must have existed in that hidden time between the lines of Genesis. Their celebration suggests something beautiful once happened, something that may have later turned into sorrow as rebellion crept into the heavenly order. Some ancient texts, like the Book of Enoch, describe a realm where angelic beings interacted with creation long before human history. These writings speak of watchers, of divine messengers, and of those who fell from grace. While not included in the traditional canon, these texts echo what many suspect, that there was a time before time, an age that ended with silence and shadow. The darkness of Genesis 1:2 might be all that remains of it, veiling that lost world in mystery. And yet, the silence of Scripture is often louder than words. By not telling us everything directly, God invites us to seek, to dig, to ask. That gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 may be the greatest mystery of the Bible, not because it lacks information, but because it holds a secret too great to be given lightly. A secret about beginnings, falls, restorations, and a God who always brings light out of darkness. The question is, how much of that secret are we ready to uncover? What if the Bible intentionally starts with a mystery to show us that not all truth comes easily? That revelation is a process, one that unfolds slowly, like light breaking through the darkness. The hidden chapter between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 isn't just a timeline issue, it's a spiritual warning. It whispers of what happens when divine order is rejected, when pride rises, and when creation turns against its creator. It reminds us that before every new beginning, there is often a collapse, a fall so great that it leaves the world unrecognizable. This also brings a new depth to the 6 days of creation. Each day isn't just about forming the natural world, it's about re-establishing divine structure over chaos, light over darkness, waters separated, land made visible. Every step God takes feels deliberate, as if reclaiming a world that once slipped into ruin. If the earth was judged before, then this act of creation is not just power, it's grace. God didn't abandon what was broken. He chose to reshape it step by step, word by word. Even the Spirit of God, hovering over the waters in Genesis 1:2, takes on new meaning. Why would the Spirit hover, like a guardian or a mourner, over deep, chaotic waters? The word used for hover is the same one used to describe a bird protecting its young. It suggests care, sorrow, and anticipation, as if God was not only about to create, but to restore something precious, something lost. The Spirit hovering over the deep might be the first sign of hope after a divine judgment we were never fully told about. And maybe that's why the Bible starts where it does, not with a perfect paradise, but with a second chance, a world once destroyed, now given the opportunity to live again. Humanity enters the story not as the first beings, but as the first beings after the fall. And that carries a weight we often overlook. We were born into a world already touched by rebellion. The serpent's presence in Eden wasn't the beginning of evil. It was the continuation of something ancient, something cosmic, that started before time as we know it. When you look at Genesis this way, the serpent becomes more than just a talking animal. He becomes a remnant, an echo from that previous age. He carries knowledge, cunning, and rebellion that didn't begin in Eden. He had already fallen. His deception of Eve wasn't his first act of rebellion. It was simply his next move in a much older war, one that started in the heavens and spilled over into the earth. And Eden, that beautiful garden, became the new battlefield. This is why many early Christian thinkers viewed Genesis as more than just a story of beginnings. They believed it contained layers, visible truths for the simple, and deeper revelations for those who dared to ask hard questions. The missing chapter between verse 1 and 2 wasn't just erased. It was hidden in plain sight, waiting for those who could read the signs. Signs found in the words darkness, void, the deep, and the spirit hovering. None of these belong in a brand new creation. They belong in the ruins of something lost. Even modern science, with its theories of ancient Earth and pre-human ages, strangely echoes the idea that the world existed long before humanity appeared. While the Bible doesn't depend on science for truth, it's fascinating how even secular voices suggest a history far deeper than what we see in Genesis 1:3 onward. It's as if the earth itself remembers. Its rocks, its depths, its silence. They all whisper of things that came before us, things that Scripture hints at, but never fully explains. So what are we to make of it all? A world before ours, a war in heaven, a serpent with a past, a restoration instead of an original creation. These aren't just fringe ideas, they form a pattern that connects dots across the Bible. And that pattern leads us to a startling truth. The greatest mysteries of Scripture aren't always in what's written clearly. They're in the gaps, in the verses that seem too quiet, in the spaces where God lets us wonder, so we'll seek Him even more. The more we explore this gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, the more we see that God may have intentionally left it unexplained, not to confuse us, but to awaken us. The Bible often reveals truth through what it says and what it doesn't say. Between those two verses lies a space meant for the seeker, the one willing to look beyond the surface. It's a divine pause, pregnant with meaning. Not everything needs to be shouted. Sometimes God whispers, and those who are hungry enough will hear it, and maybe that's why some ancient prophets spoke in riddles and visions. Ezekiel saw wheels within wheels. Isaiah saw a throne high and lifted up with seraphim crying, "Holy." These weren't random images, they were glimpses into another realm, perhaps even another time, a time before Adam, a time when celestial beings filled the heavens, and the earth was part of a grander, unseen design. That design may have cracked, may have been judged, but it wasn't forgotten. It was buried beneath silence, and then revived. The creation story we know is beautiful, but it's also layered with clues. Why does God create in steps? Why separate light from darkness on day 1 when the sun isn't made until day 4? Why mention the deep as if it was already there? These aren't contradictions, they're signals, warnings that something came before, that what we're reading is not the first draft of creation, but the divine restoration of a world already scarred by rebellion. This adds a whole new dimension to our understanding of God's character. He's not just the creator, He's the Redeemer. From the very beginning, He takes what is broken, what is void, what is covered in darkness, and He brings light. He doesn't abandon the ruins, He rebuilds them. That's the heartbeat of Genesis. And if this is how the Bible begins, if redemption is in its first breath, then maybe the entire story of Scripture is less about perfection and more about restoration. Even the phrase, "let there be light," sounds different when you understand the context of restoration. Light is not being created from nothing, it's being called forth to break a lingering darkness. This is the light of order, of purpose, of divine clarity. It is as if God is declaring war against the chaos left behind. And in that simple phrase, the hidden chapter is pushed aside, not erased but covered. So a new story can begin. A story not of angels, but of mankind. A story not of ruin, but of redemption. This view also places Adam and Eve in a unique position. They are not just the first humans, they are the chosen ones to begin anew. Born into a world already marked by spiritual conflict. The serpent wasn't their equal, it was a leftover from a former age, and that makes their test in the garden even more significant. They were entering a battlefield without knowing it. A battlefield that had been silent for ages, waiting for the next chapter in the story of free will and obedience. If God indeed judged a former world, then it reveals something powerful about his justice and his patience. He didn't stop creating. He didn't abandon Earth. He gave it another chance, and he gave that chance to us, to humans. That decision speaks volumes. It shows that even after the greatest fall, even after celestial rebellion and destruction, God is still willing to bring light again. He still believes in beginnings, not because we are worthy, but because his nature is mercy. And so, between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, there may be more than silence. There may be grief, memory, judgment, and hope. The secret chapter might never be fully written in any scroll, but it's echoed in every shadow that God turns into light. In every broken place, he chooses to restore. And maybe that's the true message. Not that the past was erased, but that it was redeemed. And that redemption was so powerful, it became the new beginning we call Genesis. When we read Genesis again with this lens, it opens up a whole new spiritual dimension. We stop seeing it as the absolute beginning and start seeing it as the divine recovery of a fallen creation. The earth wasn't new, it was renewed. And that realization humbles us, because it means our existence is part of a much older, much deeper story. One that includes both creation and collapse, judgment and mercy. It reminds us that God doesn't just start stories, he finishes them, even when others failed. And that may explain why the Bible is filled with cycles of fall and restoration, from Eden to the flood, from Israel's exile to Christ's resurrection. The pattern is always the same. Rebellion leads to ruin, but ruin never has the final word. God steps in, he speaks, he rebuilds, he calls forth light. That divine pattern didn't begin with Adam, it began in the silence before him, in that unspoken chapter where heaven's first war spilled into earth, and God chose to respond not with destruction, but with light. What would change if we embraced this truth? If we believed that from the very beginning, God was already rescuing creation, that even the first pages of the Bible carry the fingerprints of redemption, it would mean that no darkness in our lives is too deep, no ruin too final, because the God of Genesis is the same today. The one who hovered over the chaos still hovers over broken lives. And just as he spoke light into the void once before, he can do it again. So the next time you read Genesis, pause. Between verse 1 and verse 2, let the silence speak, let the darkness remind you that something was lost. But then, let the light remind you that God never gives up on what he creates. The missing chapter may never be recovered with words, but its truth is written into the bones of the earth, the rhythm of Scripture, and the heart of every soul that's ever been restored. In the end, the mystery between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 isn't just about what was lost, it's about what God was willing to do next. He didn't start over from nothing. He stepped into the wreckage. He hovered over the deep, and then he spoke. That one act, "Let there be light," wasn't just about day and night. It was about pushing back spiritual darkness, about declaring that ruin would never be the final chapter, and about showing us that his voice still has the power to resurrect even the most shattered beginnings. This revelation also reframes our view of the world we live in. Maybe it was never meant to be a perfect paradise. Maybe it was always meant to be a redeemed place, a space where the scars of a former fall remain visible, not to shame us, but to remind us of God's relentless grace. The earth is not just a planet, it's a testimony, a living witness of God's justice and mercy working together. And if we are truly the second beginning, then our very existence is built upon the ashes of the first. And yet, God didn't choose angels to rebuild this world. He chose us, fragile, flawed, and yet full of potential. That's the mystery. Not just what was removed from Genesis, but why we were written into the next part of the story. We're not the first characters, but we are the ones invited to finish the story well. That's why understanding what came before matters. It humbles us, it awakens us, and it prepares us for the weight of the mission we've inherited. So if this truth burns in your heart, don't let it fade. Like the Spirit hovering over the waters, let it stir something in you, a hunger to know more, a desire to walk in the light that once broke through the darkness. And if this message moved you like it moved the first stars to sing, then support this work, like subscribe, turn on the bell, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? You are part of this story now, a story that began in silence but ends in glory.